The story begins on a calm afternoon in a busy city. An older Black African man walks peacefully along the street. He is well dressed, carrying a small bag, and greets people politely as he passes by. Suddenly, a police officer notices him from across the street. The officer frowns and begins walking toward the man with a determined expression. Without any polite introduction, the officer stops him, accusing him of looking suspicious. The older man, surprised but calm, tries to ask what's wrong. The officer interrupts rudely, demanding to see his ID. The older man nods, reaches into his pocket, and hands over his identification without hesitation. The officer snatches it angrily, barely glancing at it. Then, to everyone's shock, he tosses the ID into a nearby dustbin, glaring at the man as if daring him to protest. People nearby pause and look on, some with concern and others pulling out their phones to record the incident. The older man stands still, his quiet dignity contrasting sharply with the officer's hostility. The tension grows as the officer begins questioning the older man in a loud and harsh tone. He accuses him of loitering and suggests he might be involved in illegal activities. The older man calmly explains that he is simply walking home after running an errand. Despite his composed response, the officer refuses to believe him. He continues to press, asking irrelevant and demeaning questions. The older man stays polite but firm, stating that he has done nothing wrong. Frustrated by the man's quiet confidence, the officer shouts, drawing even more attention from bystanders. The people around begin whispering, some shaking their heads in disapproval. A few start recording the scene on their phones. The officer notices this but doesn't stop. He dismisses the man's explanations and treats him with outright disrespect. The older man's ID, still in the dustbin, symbolizes the officer's refusal to recognize his humanity or dignity. Despite the humiliation, the man doesn't lose his composure, showing remarkable strength and patience. The conflict intensifies as the officer's bias becomes more evident, setting the stage for a dramatic turning point. The older man takes a deep breath, his face calm but resolute. He walks to the dustbin and carefully retrieves his ID card. Despite the officer's rude behavior, he remains polite and composed. He wipes the card clean with his handkerchief, showing no anger or frustration. Instead, his actions speak of quiet dignity and self-respect. The crowd watches in silence, moved by his calm response. Some of them call out to the officer, asking why he is treating the man so unfairly. The older man looks up and speaks in a steady voice. He says he has always believed in treating others with respect, no matter how they behave. His words carry weight, silencing the crowd and even the officer for a moment. The man refuses to let hatred or anger define him. His unwavering grace eyeing the face of such humiliation leaves everyone watching in awe. It is clear he is a person of great character, standing tall despite the prejudice he faces. His calm defiance begins to shift the tone of the moment, making it clear that dignity can overcome even the harshest injustice. As the scene unfolds, a black car pulls up near the commotion. A man in a suit steps out, observing the situation with a sharp gaze. He is the older man's son, a senior judge known for his fairness and integrity. He had been driving nearby when he saw the crowd and recognized his father. The officer, unaware of the connection, continues to berate the older man. The judge walks toward them with calm but purposeful strides. His presence commands attention, and the crowd parts to let him through. He addresses the officer in a firm, authoritative tone, asking what the problem is. The officer stammers, taken aback by the sudden intervention. The older man looks at his son with a mixture of relief and quiet pride. The judge demands to know why the officer has treated his father with such disrespect. When the officer hesitates, the judge calmly introduces himself, showing his credentials. The color drains from the officer's face as he realizes who he has been insulting. The judge doesn't raise his voice but speaks with a quiet power that leaves no room for argument. He tells the officer that no one, regardless of status or race, deserves to be treated this way. His words resonate deeply with the crowd, and they begin murmuring in agreement. The officer, now visibly shaken, tries to justify his actions, but the judge's piercing gaze stops him. In that moment, the tables turn, and the officer's authority crumbles under the weight of his own prejudice. The officer stands frozen, his face a mix of shock and embarrassment. He stares at the judge, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. His hands tremble as he tries to explain himself, but his words come out jumbled and weak. He had assumed so much about the older man based on his appearance, never imagining that he was connected to someone as influential as a senior judge. The crowd watches in silence, their earlier anger now replaced with curiosity about how the officer will respond. The older man remains calm, his quiet dignity making the officer's actions seem even more petty. The officer glances around, noticing the cameras still recording. He feels the weight of their judgment, and it begins to sink in how deeply he has embarrassed himself. Regret flashes across his face as he mutters an apology, but it feels hollow. The judge, standing tall and composed, doesn't accept the apology immediately. Instead, he reminds the officer of the importance of fairness and respect, not just for people of status, but for everyone. The officer's head drops, the realization hitting him hard. His uniform, once a symbol of authority, now feels like a burden as he grapples with the consequences of his actions. The regret in his eyes is clear, but the damage has already been done. The older man steps forward, his eyes filled with kindness rather than anger. He looks at the officer, who is now visibly shaken, and speaks in a calm, steady voice. He says that everyone makes mistakes and that it's not too late to change. His words are unexpected, given the humiliation he endured. The crowd, which had been watching intently, grows silent, touched by the man's grace. He tells the officer that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. Holding on to hatred only creates more pain. The officer looks up, surprised by the man's response. He had expected anger or resentment, but instead he is met with compassion. The older man goes on to say that respect should not depend on status, power, or skin color. It is something everyone deserves. His voice is gentle but carries wisdom and experience. The crowd begins to murmur in agreement, and some even applaud. The officer struggles to hold back tears, realizing the depth of the older man's character. This act of forgiveness doesn't just free the officer from guilt, it also teaches a lesson to everyone present about the power of compassion and humanity. The officer, deeply moved by the older man's forgiveness, takes a step back and reflects on his actions. He realizes how blind his prejudice had made him. He looks at the older man and the judge, understanding for the first time how wrong he has been. With a shaky voice, he apologizes, this time with genuine remorse. He admits that his behavior was unjust and promises to do better. The judge nods but reminds him that true change comes from actions, not just words. He encourages the officer to reflect on how he treats others and to make fairness a part of his duty. The older man steps in, offering words of wisdom. He talks about the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their background. He shares a story from his past about how kindness had changed his own life. The officer listens intently, his heart heavy with regret, but also hopeful for redemption. The lesson isn't just for the officer, it resonates with the crowd as well. People begin to see the older man not just as a victim of injustice, but as a teacher of life's most important values. From that day, the officer starts making changes in how he interacts with the community. He becomes more thoughtful and respectful, determined to leave his prejudice behind. The experience becomes a turning point in his life, reminding him and everyone watching that equality and understanding are not just ideals, they are essential for a better world. As the crowd slowly begins to disperse, a sense of calm settles over the scene. The officer, now humbled, stands with his head bowed, deep in thought. The older man, his forgiveness still shining through, turns to walk away with his son. The judge walks beside him, his face calm but proud. They don't need to say anything to each other. The moment speaks for itself. The officer watches them leave, his heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. He knows he will never forget what happened today. As the two men walk away, they hear someone from the crowd speak up. "This is the kind of world we need," someone says, and others quietly agree. The officer looks back one last time at the older man, his figure now fading into the distance. He has learned something that will stay with him forever. The lesson of respect, kindness, and the power of forgiveness is now a part of him. It is a lesson he will carry with him in his work and in his life. The older man's quiet dignity and the judge's firm guidance have changed not just one person, but the whole atmosphere of the community. The officer, once filled with pride and prejudice, now sees the world with new eyes. And as the scene closes, it becomes clear that one moment of understanding can spark a lasting change. The camera lingers on the officer, who stands tall, slowly walking toward his patrol car, his steps lighter, carrying the weight of a new beginning. We hope you enjoyed this story and learned a lesson. For more related videos, please subscribe our channel and don't forget to like, share, and comment where from you watch. Thanks for watching.